How are you with asking for help? Most people I know at any level of depth struggle with that. I do. Friday morning, sprawled out, hitting my head on a rock, blood swelling instantly. Martha was with me, and there were some people coming down the trail, and she started to call to them. And my first thought was, oh God, don't do that. What are they going to do anyway? We had passed those people on our way down. The woman, and they were just 2 minutes behind us as they were coming down the trail. I'll just share with you that as they approached, the first thing the woman said was, "Head wounds bleed profusely." And I thought, well, she knows what she's doing. And then Martha's looking for our first aid kit, which is, I'll just call it junior first aid, really, compared. And this woman, when I look up again, has gloves on and this huge kit and a wrap for my head. She says, "It's all right, I'm a nurse practitioner." And I didn't want to be embarrassed by asking for help. How are you when other people ask for help? Most of us that I know do better with that one. I mean, after all, whether online or in person, we're part of a faith community. We're here to help, right? I mean, that's our attitude. If someone asks for help, well, then we can enter into that. That gives us something to do. We really, I do believe, sincerely want to be helpful. But what about when the request for help is outside our comfort zone or particularly messy? I remember one time, and it's rare as a pastor to get to worship in other churches, but I was worshiping in this other church, and they had a practice before the prayer time of sharing prayer requests with a microphone. And there was a wireless mic that an usher would take, kind of like, remember the Oprah Winfrey show? There's probably still, but right, you just went out to the people. And most of the prayer requests were, in my experience, what I'll call like the kind of typical ones you'd expect, where there's a cousin with cancer praying for peace in wherever there was a conflict somewhere, a natural disaster. But then there was this woman, when she took the microphone in her hand, she then grabbed it with her other hand, and she held that wireless microphone as if it were holding her up. And she started to speak, and her voice broke. And I'm used to, in churches that I've been part of, your voice breaks, and you're just like, swallow it down, regain composure so we can get on with it. She didn't do that. She just started to cry. That became sobbing into, help me, Jesus, sobbing, crying. And the usher gently took the microphone out of her hand. 2 more ushers appeared quickly and began to escort her out of the worship space. And I could feel palpable tension in the room. Everyone was stiff. And as she was going through the door, it's sort of like she kind of came to herself, realized what was happening, say, wait, I don't want to leave the service. And the door closed, and she was gone. And I thought about the story in our gospel reading today. So Jesus has come with his disciples, done something in Jericho. It's interesting, they don't think it's worth noting this time. But we see what Jesus does other times and places, teaching, healing, challenging words, comforting words, the whole Jesus thing with his ensemble. And so likely a buzz has been created in Jericho. And so as Jesus is now exiting Jericho, there are people lining the streets, trying to greet him, get to see him, etc. Well, among the people on the street is a man who is, we're told, blind, and he's named Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus likely has been placed there by his family, because when you can't see, you could not in that time and place do what would be considered the mainstream of work, so your work was to beg, and your family would place you in the best locations to receive the resources that you would need. You have to feed, you have to, right? Most people, remember, they're living below what we'd call poverty level. So Bartimaeus placed there, and he can't see, but somehow he knows when Jesus comes. Well, how would that be? Well, I'm imagining it's kind of like the wave of sound. Here comes Jesus, and you hear the buzz, the roar, the clamoring. So as the sound gets closer to Bartimaeus, he cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And it's interesting in the story, Bartimaeus, we're told he's blind, but he's already seeing things. He sees in his own mind and heart that Jesus has something important going on in him. When he calls him Son of David, in his culture, time, and place, that's a way of saying you're out of that lineage of David, you're going to usher in God's reign or God's kingdom, King David. God's reign, Jesus is coming, ushering in God's reign or ushering people into God's reign. However it works, something of the God thing is going on in this guy, and he's noting it, naming it, understands it. And then when he cries out, "Have mercy on me," the Hebrew word, the sense of the word in Hebrew for mercy is abundance pouring into scarcity. And I love that. Mercy, when you hear that word, think of abundance pouring into scarcity. So he sees, even though he can't physically see, he sees in Jesus there's something of God's abundance. He sees his own need and scarcity. He doesn't even necessarily name the form it needs to take. You've got something big in you. I've got something that feels really small in me. Can you offer something of that overflow to me, whatever it is? And then his village, the other people of Jericho, they quickly help him up and escort him over to Jesus. No, they didn't. I know some of you are shaking your head like, Michael. But that's what I wish they did. Right? We'd say it takes a village to raise up a child, but raise people up. But a village can also try to hold people back. And the village tells Bartimaeus after he cries out, "Be quiet. Hush up." Why would they do that? Why do they care if he cries out for help? Well, on one level, I think about all the ways, especially when people, if we perceive ourselves as we've got it together or we're okay in whatever place that we feel like we've got some power, that when people are crying out, we often want to manage how they do it. Well, you can ask for help, but in this way. You could protest, but only in this form, right? There's often this desire to somehow manage or control the neediness of others. But still, deeper down, why? What's the matter? Well, in that village, in that time, on that spot, one of the things I wonder about is as Bartimaeus, in his bold vulnerability, does he remind the people around him of their own vulnerability, their own need? And most of us would rather not be reminded of that. We like to feel like we're in charge, we're in control, we're holding it together. This needy, loud, messy person in our midst reminds us of our own vulnerability, mortality, all the things we'd rather not be paying attention to. I mean, I look at my own face in the mirror, I'm like, ugh. Right? I don't want to see that because look how vulnerable I am. Oh, no thank you. So there can be then this tendency to want to shut that down, shut that up, literally, in the story. But Bartimaeus, I mentioned in the story, we're told he's blind, but yet he sees things. Bartimaeus sees that not asking for help has not helped him. Bartimaeus sees that despite what his village is saying, he's worthy of mercy. It's all right to ask. Yeah, there's peer pressure, but I need help. And this is my favorite part of the story. It says, Bartimaeus yelled out even more loudly, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And perhaps this is what lifts his voice above the din of the crowd, because Jesus hears him. And notice that Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, how embarrassing." Right? Jesus stopped. Jesus is not upset or distressed about someone's bold, messy vulnerability, because this is what Jesus came for. It's all the people who think they've got it together, figured out, in control. He can't do much for them. They just want to have fights. But the people who know their need and name it, well, now he has something to work with. And Jesus, we hear, calls him over. And Bartimaeus says, and this we could miss this detail, it says he flung off his cloak and went to Jesus. And it's not because he's warm. The cloak that he's wearing, it's the equivalent of his uniform. This is the beggar's cloak. This is how people knew that you were in need. And so there's something in Bartimaeus that's saying, I'm letting go of the old way, the old life, There's a real risk-taking in this. And he rushes over to Jesus. And then he's there before Jesus, and Jesus asks him, what do you want me to do for you? When any of you heard that, did you think, well, come on, Jesus, isn't it obvious? Why would he ask that question? It's not that Jesus wouldn't know or be sensitive to it. I believe Jesus understands that it's important for Bartimaeus to name it. There is power in the naming. When we can speak to our vulnerabilities, our challenge, our struggles, well, then there can be room for someone to enter into those. Because it can be a little, I remember one time, I was saying it to someone, I was like, I wish someone would just help me with this. Well, help you with what? This. Like, I didn't want to be that vulnerable to say what this was, because then maybe someone might have actually helped me. What do you want me to do for you? And Bartimaeus says, my rabbi. And they're really just meeting for the first time, but there's this beautiful sense of intimacy and connection in the story. My rabbi, my teacher, I want to see again. And then Jesus, it's interesting what he doesn't say, boom, your sight is restored or something like that. He says, a fair translation is, let's go, your trust has made you whole. Let's go, your trust has made you whole. He's not addressing what we'd call the physical issue at the moment. And I believe that part of this is about that Jesus didn't come to just kind of tweak people's small physical things. The whole point for Jesus is ultimately being whole persons. Whole in our connection with God, in our connection with ourselves as the beloved of God, whole in relationships with other people. And all those physical things in the stories are just outward manifestations of the ways where we feel stuck or small or held back. Remember, when we have a physical ailment in a biblical story, it's never just about the physical ailment. Because if you're not literally blind today, you'd say, well, I'll wait for the next story that has something to do with me. But there's this recognition that there's ways we don't see. And that's why it's a story for us. And that though Jesus says, let's go, there's a sense of movement. In other words, I think, come with me. And as you do, you're going to fully live into your trust that's bringing this wholeness. And that's ultimately the point, the wholeness, the restoration of the truth of who he is. Not the nobody other wearing the beggar's cloak on the side of the road that no one cares about, who's being shut up by his community. But who he is a beloved child of God who can live and move and share and offer great gifts in the world. And Jesus sees it and says, you come with me and we'll live into that wholeness. And it's interesting, it says, as he went, his sight was restored. So he's already seeing some things, he now just sees more. And so it's a story that I think invites and challenges us to note what are the ways we don't necessarily see. Ways that we don't see Spirit at work in us. Ways that we don't see God at work or Spirit at work in other people. I have lots of days where I just think, are we just on our own here? What a mess everything is. So I can get closed down. I think we all can get closed down. And so there's a story that reminds us that it's in naming the need, even saying what I just said out loud. Tell someone, I feel hopeless about everything today. I feel like we'll never get out of the pandemic. I feel like there's a divisiveness that can never be healed. It doesn't mean that's what it is or how it will always be, but if that's what we're feeling, if that's where we're vulnerable, if that's what's hurting, speak it. Speak it to God, to each other, because then it invites other voices, other possibilities to enter in. But just kind of shoving it down like me sprawled on a mountain trail, right? Like, I'll just turn my head to the side and let the nurse go by. That would have been me. A man was telling me about his experience at a retreat I had facilitated. We had an annual retreat in this one church. We call it the Spiritual Life Retreat. And in this particular retreat, people had, there's probably 30, 40 people on this retreat. They had received some instruction in a spiritual practice, a contemplative practice. People went off to go engage that with some instruction and help. But then throughout the weekend, they were in these small groups together to form community, to have a chance to process, to share. And so after one of these practices, he'd come back into a small group, and he said some of the people were talking about their experience and some of their faith journey and ways that, to use language that we were addressing last week, ways God had been real for them. And the man telling me the story said, out of nowhere, he found himself just yelling, "I want that! Where do you get that?" He felt this desperation. "I haven't ever had that. Where does that come from?" And the people around him did not shush him. They asked him good questions. They shared more of their experience, strength, and hope. And they ended that time specifically by praying together for him in his own place of struggle and challenge and need. And the reason I know that story is that a year later he's talking to me and he says, all my life I was told to stay quiet, to be good, especially in church. If I hadn't shouted out, if I hadn't just let that feeling emerge, I never would have heard that wisdom. I never would have received those prayers. He said, I look back on that, and it's not like it's all clear to me now, but that's when I really started to see more. And I hope I'll be that kind of person for someone else. Vulnerability can be messy, both to share it or to see it. We have a God who is okay with messes. We have a God who, the initial creation story says, God moves over the chaos, the mess, and forms creation, births something new. So let us be the people committed to this way where we entrust ourselves and know more of that wholeness in us. And we can live and embody more of that wholeness, bringing more sight into ourselves and into the world. When we do, that's good news. Praise God. Amen.